Aló. Aló.
This is pure snow! It's everywhere! Have you any idea what the street value of this mountain is? Charles, wait a minute, hold it!
Aló.
Yo. What's up? You're tuned in to another episode of The Void. And we got Seth Rock Beats playing in the background. Link in the description. Seth Rock's Bandcamp. He actually, this song is off of a dual vinyl album, instrumental album. So if you like these beats, you're gonna check it out.
Everywhere! Have you any idea what the street value of this mountain is? Charles, wait a minute, hold it!
All that snow. All right, so we've got another episode, Sunday Sesh. You know, I was talking about just all sorts of different, I don't know, I was just talking to some folks about Epstein and conspiracy theories sort of came up in general. And I was like, well, why don't we just talk about all of the above? Let's just see what we can come up with as a group as far as sort of hashing out some of this stuff. I'm sure plenty of folks have by now heard of the Jeffrey Epstein debacle or whatever's going on with that. And I mean, it just goes back to some of the issues we talked about before, where we don't really know what's real anymore. At least, I mean, I don't think I know, and I don't know that I trust someone who thinks they know. Like, what makes them know so much? And they could be working for the government. They could be working for whoever is intimately involved with whatever it is we're talking about. And how do I know they're not lying? You know, because people will justify, for whatever reason, that they feel is justified to lie to your face about whatever it is. So especially, like, I mean, if there's people in the military, people in police, actually almost every walk of life, there's probably at least one time where your employer asked you to basically lie about something or omit some kind of factual thing that they didn't want the public to know or something like that. So, you know, extrapolate that out to more important shit, like whether or not there's a child sex slave, ring going on. I mean, think about that. Like child sex slaves being peddled around, possibly used for stuff like blackmail and whatever. So a few episodes ago, I mentioned a book called Behold a Pale Horse by William Cooper. And he outlines some of the sort of sinister things that are going on as far as people in power and what makes them so, I don't know, I guess, so tightly bound. Like, how is it that in general people can never keep secrets very well, but in some cases we have people that, or have these conspiracies that go on and nobody has any special information about, the validity of them, or concrete proof of just whatever we're talking about. So all right, we got some folks already on the chat. What's up? What's up, Chris? Superfan Mike, what's up? Happened all the time when I was in the Navy, cover-ups galore. See, I mean, even if you're not super high-level secret access to stuff, I mean, you end up privy to cover-ups. You end up privy to things that are top secret you're not allowed to talk about. And so even, I mean, I'm not saying Chris wasn't at some high level. I'm just saying that even whatever the perception is of, like for instance, in Behold a Pale Horse, he talks about there's like basically, like I'll take for example the Council of Foreign Relations. That's a group of people that help craft. It's almost like a think tank in a way, more than that, because these people influence policy, and well, think tanks do too, but it seems like there's something more powerful in there. Basically, these people would be, I guess, if you were one of those folks that, especially Trump fans and whatnot, talking about the deep state, CFR, the Council of Foreign Relations, would be an example of a deep state organization. And what makes them so powerful? Well, for one thing, people like to be part of a group. And so when you have these secret societies and you have something where they can adhere to a group, like, I mean, people join the Boy Scouts as much for learning how to tie knots and do wildlife shit as they are to just be in fellowship with other people and be in a group with some folks that can resonate on the same topic or culture or something like that. So, we have a situation where Council of Foreign Relations, people want to be part of it, or they want to be in the good graces of the council. And so a lot of people are clamoring to become part of the CFR. But the thing is, people in the CFR are just pawns. Most of them are just pawns. And they might have more influence than us. I mean, we're like the board. I mean, people like to talk about the general populace as pawns. No. I don't think we're pawns. We're the freaking board. They play on us. You know what I mean? They need us, but they don't give a shit. They just, I mean, the pawns and shit are moving across us. All of that. So CFR is full of pawns. And then there's a few people as you rise up the echelon that become more and more powerful. But you have to be able to show and prove to get to the top. Now, in the book, he talks about like Skull and Bones, I think, and like George Bush having to sit in a, like, I don't know, like in a casket naked with like a flag on his pee-pee while he talks about all his sexual exploits, and that's supposed to be like, oh, we all heard what you did. So now, if you try to backtrack on something, or you don't want to do what the secret society or whoever's privy to what you did in the secret society for initiation, those people, whoever knows that stuff, can hold it over you and blackmail you. And so, they say the something similar happens with Scientology. Once you get in, it's like this thing where they constantly hook you with some money and stuff, because part of the process is for you to like sort of atone all of the sins that you've committed through some type of basically a confessionary type thing. And then, of course, stuff's held over your head for later blackmail. So what might be going on, or what seems to be going on, or who even knows, I don't know. But this whole Epstein thing seems like there's a, and there's a term pedophile ring thrown around. And people keep talking about it like it's just this thing that some people do. You know what I mean? Like, oh, in elite circles, they have child sex slaves, and that's just sort of like the thing. And it's like, whoa, wait a minute. Like, what? How the fuck do we just have that happening? And it's like, what are we? I mean, it's almost like getting normalized, and people, someone out there, I mean, there's already a dude that shot up a pizza parlor because he thought there was the sex ring happening with Pizzagate and the Clintons and Podesta and all these people, which they might be part of that. I mean, I believe it's a bipartisan issue. It's an international issue. Supposedly one of the British princes is, I can go look it up, but I was listening to some reports about people that are implicated in the Epstein ring. And it's an international thing, possibly international thing, and it's an elitist thing. People that have enough money to be basically above the law. And the question that it brings for me is, like, if these people are doing shit like this above the law, who's going to stop them? Obviously, the law can't do it, right? So what's the answer? And so, I don't know. I'd like to see what folks joining in have to say about it. And so hopefully we'll get some folks, tuning in with some opinions. We got some here on the, let's see, got some. Oh, Chris said, yes, one is the Queen's son. Yeah, that's what I'm saying, like internationally here. And the question becomes, well, I can't remember how exactly Epstein got caught. And that opens up some questions. Like, if he got caught, we don't know. I mean, it's too hard for us to tell 100% if it's because there's a greater ploy at hand, like diversion from other things, like the Amazon rainforest burning down, or something else that's going on in the administration. I mean, we're the board on which they play. So our perception just gets manipulated left and right. So what's the truth? There's probably some truth sprinkled around all over the place, but how would we know? Now, one of the things that I'd like to know is, where are these kids coming from? Like, are they missing children, or missing child report, or missing child reports are being filed, or like, who are these people, and have they found any of them? And because this one of the things that I've noticed in this whole debacle is sort of the lack of the focus on the children themselves. It's just that, oh my God, there's a pedophile ring, but there's not a lot of the focus on, like, where's this the whole thing being fed from, and where are these, what's happening, regardless of the sources, etc. It shouldn't be happening. But and what can we do about it as citizens if the vectors for justice are not are clogged, I guess you could say, or not moving along. All right, so Chris has looks like a big comment here. I strongly believe it has been a diversion, and as always, it works to distract everyone. Notice the president quickly came out and cast blame on the Dems in order to deflect attention off him as well. Yeah, that's the thing. The Clintons and Trump are implicated, and international. And I mean, there's actors, there's all sorts of people involved in this. And so should be a concerning thing for Americans, that we're running into a situation like this. Mike says, yeah, they have footage of him hanging out at the Epstein's house. Yeah, there's all sorts of mess, so this just is an example of one of many situations where we as a society are sort of stuck in this sort of holding pattern, trying to figure out like what's the reality that we're dealing with now. And Thomas Jefferson, in a letter from that he wrote about, when was it? It was after or during the Shays Rebellion. He was in I want to say France, but somewhere in Europe, and this is the same excuse me, the same letter that the quote that the tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants. It is its natural manure, he says. That last part's not so poetic as the first part. The word manure, I feel like, is never really that poetic. But I don't know if you disagree. Let me know. But let me see. What's the Jefferson's? So I want to read something to you, because there, when I was talking about that guy that did that shot up the pizza parlor because of Pizzagate, he ended up, or at least in the stories that people heard, he wasn't able to find the pedophile ring, and there's nothing under the basement in the basement. And so he ended up being wrong. But Thomas Jefferson really would have said, well, at least he tried. After reading this, I don't know how much you want to give credence to Thomas Jefferson. Being a founding father, that's a pretty big deal. But he also had slaves and stuff. But it was a paradigm at the time. No, you shouldn't be. There's no excuses for it. You should, if you're super smart, right? You would think that you would be able to distinguish humanity and act accordingly. But we can fight about that later. Or that's a whole other show as far as social stuff. No. Let's see. Where's his? There's a letter. I want to read I don't want to screw up the quote. So, but I'm interested in showing you this because it sort of not backs what I'm saying, but it's an interesting perspective to have, especially in today's world of manipulation and sheep making. Basically, because we're all the folks that are quote unquote in control truly have a belief that they should be in control, and that we, or the people in general, are basically the board on which they play. And it's not for the board to play the game, it's for the board to be played on, and etc. It's something to be used as a mechanism for someone else to win, even though pawns and all these things get destroyed as they are fighting amongst each other. Meanwhile, it's all happening on top of the board, which is the backs of the populace. But let me, okay, hold on. I'm going to find it for you because I didn't know I was going to actually bring this up. But what the heck? So the thing that was going on was he was away in the early, when America very first was started, and he heard about this rebellion, and to some folks' surprise, he was not worried about it. He was like, look, we're a new nation and we're going to have fits and starts, basically. And I would rather than be rebellious through ignorance, and eventually the better idea will succeed. But that he would rather them be ignorant and rebellious and in the face of tyranny and the preservation of liberty than he would for them to be basically sheep like we are now. Because I mean, if somebody, like, I know there's people out there that just the notion that kids are getting implicated in this whole situation, whether it's real or not. If it's not real and it's floating around, then if somebody goes and does something, then I would hope that spreading fake shit would the consequences of spreading fake shit would be more clear. Now, I'm not saying go do something, because I can't, because if I said that, NSA listening, and I'm gonna be locked up and whatnot, you know what I'm saying? So I don't want to get locked up. I'm too pretty for that shit. You know what I'm saying? No, I'm just kidding. I don't want to get fucking locked up. Who wants to, because anything can be interpreted. So if you were to, even though we're talking about quoting founding fathers, even though we're, taking on the same what's it called, mentality as Thomas Jefferson, it doesn't matter. You be inciting rebellion or inciting violence or suggesting violence or some crap, which I'm just saying that eventually people will feel strong enough about something to where they will put their lives or their bodies on the gears of the machine, whatever machine that is, and attempt to stop it. It's going to happen, and I'm surprised it's not happening more. But then again, we have a world in which there are a lot of controls. Let's say you wanted to do some what they would call it is eco-terrorism in the Amazon. Let's say you wanted to go and sabotage the bulldozers and go and sabotage the fire starters, and or you decided to find the names and addresses of the people who are in charge of that stuff, and I don't know, have your way with them. There would probably be state forces or other forces through these vectors of power that would prevent you. Like, for instance, when people were trying to, stand up against the Dakota Access Pipeline, it didn't matter. I mean, the police would basically shoot you. I mean, if you had any type of weaponry, you would be brought down with asymmetrical force. Now, there's this fantasy, which I hold on to some degree, that the armed populace should be able to go toe to toe with the tyrannical government. But if someone were to do that, our sheep-like population would turn on each other almost immediately. It's almost, I was watching Forensic Files. There's an old Forensics Files episode where there was it turned out to be the husband, but as the investigators were looking at the situation, they saw that there were some dogs involved, and that these dogs were, instead of fighting against an intruder, because it was actually someone they knew, they were fighting against each other. And it almost reminds me of something like that. So they stood there, and because they knew the person, this was the husband who had killed the wife, the dogs, I guess, were barking or doing something while the husband was killing the wife, and the husband ended up beating the dogs to the point where they ended up having to euthanize them. Super sad story, but in the end, the DNA evidence after the forensics folks got involved, turned out that the blood on the dogs came from the dogs themselves fighting amongst themselves while they were taking the beating from the master, right? I mean, if there's something, Forensic Files obviously isn't something where there's a metaphor being purposely put into these episodes. It's just a recollection of something that happened. But I can't help but think about the American people as those dogs being beat while they bite and fight at each other. That's the state of the American people right now, I feel like, because we can't really even talk to each other half the time if we're have opposing views. And one of the things that I'm realizing more and more, especially as I troll these places like Atlas Society and libertarian web pages and stuff like that, seeking challenges from folks so I can be basically put in my place with these arguments. I'm finding that people are just not, the thought of challenging their belief system is more painful and crazy of an idea than practically anything, and people don't realize the reason why I have the views I have now is from constantly challenging myself. Tim Minchin had an amazing speech that he gave. I mentioned this before, but I'll mention it again. Tim Minchin, I think he's an Australian comedian. He gave an amazing speech. You should look it up. Maybe I'll try to find it, put it in the description here. But he says in there towards the end, he said, opinions are like assholes, right? And that's true. Everybody has one. But unlike assholes, your opinion should constantly and thoroughly be examined. And through constant and thorough examination of my opinions, I've come to my conclusions. And so I've held beliefs on all sides of the spectrum, and through doing that and also washing away the identity, from who I am. I am James Boyd. I am this person who has these interests, etc., or whoever, however you want to define me as a being, as a person, consciously, physically, whatever. But part of that identification of who I am does not have to be things like party affiliation or, political opinion about society, societal things, because those things should be malleable. If I like a certain music or certain art or the way I think, etc., is one way, but things that are complex that should be malleable to some degree when presented with new knowledge. Like, for instance, I'm not going to stop liking hip hop music just because I heard another genre of music I also like, or it turns out I like, right? However, if I have a political belief and then I see, or if I am presented with a perspective that challenges my beliefs, and in my current belief system or current beliefs can't reconcile this new information, then I have to consider changing what's going on, what my point of view is, and what my conviction is. In fact, I almost, to some degree, don't have very specific convictions, because all of these things should be able to be changed with new information as it's presented. I'll tell you, there's so many people that have a challenge, and I don't doubt that some of the folks that jumped on today might have some of those challenges too. Looks like we had up to 5 people on YouTube. So thanks, everyone. Looks like we got 3 right now. So you guys are 3 very unique folks in the world, because out of the billions of people, billions, right? So, yeah, billions of people on this planet, you 3 at this very moment are very unique in tuning in to the Boyd podcast and being part of the conversation. So speaking of the conversation, let's talk about some comments. All right, Chris got a good one here. They are always doing these pedophile crackdown on the lower level, but I often wonder if this is continually to hide the fact that the big shots of the world are the ones doing these vile acts. That's a really good question. And if they're not pursuing this, who's telling? And this is a question this is part of the reality that might be happening with Epstein. So on one, how do I say this? On one hand, there's a potential for a very complex conspiracy that's happening. On the other hand, Occam's razor oftentimes applies. What's Occam's razor? I think that might be a good thing for us to to learn about. Here, I'm going to turn this over to. Let me read the rest of the comments. I'm going to tell you what Occam's razor is. Basically, it's when you're presented with multiple options for explaining something. It'll be the simplest option. And so, if some of you guys might have heard of the term Occam's razor, and I'll show you a definition so you don't have to believe me. You can believe something from Google, because we can't believe everything that people say, right? So here we go. So this is here you go, Occam's razor. You guys can see it here. So Occam's razor is a principle from philosophy. Suppose there exist two explanations for an occurrence. In this case, the one that requires the least speculation is usually correct. Another way of saying it is that the more assumptions you have to make, the more unlikely an explanation. Right. So this is where a lot of our conspiracy theories sort of fall, is somewhere between the malevolent acts of those in power, which we know that most of them are psychopaths because of the what's it called? There's a documentary called I Am Fishhead. If you haven't seen it, topdocumentaryfilms.com has it. I Am Fishhead. It refers to the prevalence of psychopathy in leadership. So we're talking about corporate leadership, especially corporate leadership, but also for government leadership. So, a lot of times you hear people trying to define humanity by the actions of people like Genghis Khan or our presidents or all sorts of people, when in fact the majority of actual people who live on the earth are just trying to chill and make a living and have kids and just die and do whatever, you know what I mean? But someone rallies them, like Hitler or Mussolini or Mao or somebody rallies the population in one way or another, and next thing you know, they're like the rape of Nanking is happening. You see what I mean? Now, some of those people might just be psychopathic anyway, but Wetiko, we talked about Wetiko episode ago, is a contagious virus, right? A cannibalistic virus in which you will consume your fellow human for your own gain. So once the leader, because we are pack animals, once the leader decides one way of being is the way that it should be, there are some cases where that you can get a population to do it, and if they're afflicted with Wetiko, then they will also spread that Wetiko to their subjects. All right, so Chris also said, basically, the more they talk about it, the more society becomes numb to the fact that it's going on daily, just like the mass shootings. Yeah, there's a normalization that's happening out there. Chris says, I remember that episode. He remembers the episode. It was a German Shepherd dog that fought the others. Sad story, actually. Yeah, I think it was. I think the German Shepherd, it was like a wolf mix, and he was the husband's dog. And I think he was fighting against the other two dogs or something like that. And they had to put the other two dogs down. True story, about 12 years ago, I would stay up all night watching the show. It was addicting. Yeah, it's real. It's based on the forensic files, but like I said, it's not meant to be a metaphor, but I see a metaphor in that. When I look at the American population, we should be unified and awake and aware. Now, I'm not talking about woke, because woke is what does that even mean, right? And because every possible thing that it can will be hijacked by capitalism, even wokeness, even anti-capitalism will get hijacked by capitalism. And so almost anything, any attempt to sort of wake the folks up will be, like I said, hijacked, or there's another word. God, what's the word that I'm looking for? I'll have to get back on that word. What was that? Co-opted? Maybe co-opted is the word I'm looking for. There's also another word that would have been good. Let's look at what co-opted means for those of you that here we go. So some people don't know. I mean, that's part of this show is to introduce vocabulary that you might not hear all the time. So something like if you hear something's been co-opted by somebody or something. Here's a definition real quick here. Co-opt. Appoint to membership of a committee or other body by invitation of the existing members. That's one. But this is really where this definition is really where it comes into play. Divert to or use in a role different from the usual or original one. Quote, social scientists were co-opted to work with the development agencies, unquote. Right. So for instance, there's a burgeoning anti-capitalist movement that's moving around right now globally. There's also a burgeoning right-wing, pretty much fascist movement that's being created. And I'm not being hyperbolic. I'm using the terms and definitions as they've historically been used. However, terms and definitions are only good as their use. Like, for instance, the word decadent. Decadent means really it's a negative connotation. Let's look at decadent. But we talk, like when you hear the word decadent, you probably think about like a decadent chocolate cake, right? But decadent really started, I mean, it has the same root word as decay. So etymologist, not an entomologist. Entomologists study insects. Etymologists study the origins of words. So the word origin, the root word is for decadent, is the same Latin word as decay. So the first definition here for this adjective, characterized by or reflecting a state of moral or cultural decline. But what ends up happening is a lot of people, when they talk about something being decadent, they'll use this other definition, a person who is luxuriously self-indulgent. So you're taking this sort of luxurious experience, or you're describing this as luxurious experience. The chocolate cake was decadent. The trappings of the manor or the estate were, clothed in decadence or some crap, right? So the terms that we use, like when I say fascist, some people just think, like Donald Trump or something, where he does have some fascist tendencies, and they are alarming. However, we might not be necessarily at a point where it's full on fash just yet, but pretty dang close, depending on your definitions. There's a Fintan O'Toole, actually, Irish guy, wrote a really good article a couple years back, I want to say around 2016, in which he talks about the evolution of fascism and how it comes about in your society. And part of that is by the leadership presenting more and more heinous things. Like, will the public rise up and make a big stink about X? So like if we start, let's say there's a bunch of people trying to get into the country because their country's falling to shit, because partly due to the actions of the U.S. in some of these countries, right? And some folks, of course, don't accept the results of what the administration, even whether you want to talk about Obama administration or the Trump administration, what their solutions were to those problems. And Fintan O'Toole talks about this notion that is, if you can start to dehumanize people and then people start to accept that as a premise, then and allow inhumane treatment of humans, then you are now seeing the boundaries tested and tested. So it's not that, that there's going to be a full-on, push to create massive programs, even though there might be some, there's programs happening. Part of what's happening is to see how far can something go without the people actually doing anything about it or making an uprising or some kind of big stink about it. So those are some of the things that end up happening. Who's to say that the Epstein debacle isn't another one of those things? A lot of folks believe that, despite the official narrative that he committed suicide, practically everybody that I've talked to does not believe that, right? So if you don't believe that, then what is the implication and what's the result of the fact that this is happening before your eyes? If the American people don't do anything about it and it just sort of slides, then this will be another pushing of the envelope. Maybe not necessarily towards fascism, but it's a pushing of the envelope societally to see what will actually motivate the American people into action. Now, I don't have any specific actions for you, but according to what, and I couldn't find the quote, but according to what I read in Thomas Jefferson's letter about Shays' Rebellion, action in ignorance can sometimes be better than no action at all, because by doing the ignorant action, you call attention to the machine in which you're trying to fight. Now, it might mean sacrifice for yourself, and you could do it without killing people or whatever. I mean, there's different ways of causing a ripple in the status quo. But like I said, if I start telling you something, then I don't know, then they could link it back to me and like, oh, James, you suggested someone go and do this thing, and now they went and did it. Then again, maybe that's me putting my body on the gears of the machine. Tell you what, help me build subscribers. I think I'm at 40 something. Let's build the subscriber base. Tell your friends. The more people we get, if we get a huge platform, I'll start laying my life or myself on the gears of the machine and telling you some things that I've been thinking about. If I was going to write a novel about the instigation of the big shitstorm, how would that start? What would that look like? And how would a small rebel force instigate those changes? I have those ideas. I wouldn't dare fucking say them right now, but it's really simple, and I'm not that smart. So I know a lot of people have already thought of this shit. I know it. It's just nobody, they're number one, they haven't acted on it. If they did act on it, it's been covering up. Like, for instance, David Koch died recently. I think David, right? Koch, one of the Koch brothers. They said it was due to some shit. I don't know what it was. But how do I know he didn't get sniped in the face from a mile away from someone who's tired of his shit? I don't know. How do I, if his brother dies in the next, little while, how do we know? How do we know there's not a ragtag little army out there popping these people off? I don't know. We don't. How can we believe them anymore? The media, anybody. So if any, it could be anything, right? Epstein could be alive, right? I don't know. Did you see the autopsy? Were you there? Did you touch it? I mean, it could be Stranger Things. It could be filled with freaking fluff. I don't know. Plastic Epstein full of foam. Who is he even real? Did you know about him before? Well, I guess there's pictures of him from a long time ago, but shit. I mean, nowadays with, they got technology that can, obviously you could Photoshop people into different things. They can create your voice, virtually create your voice, just based off a sample. So basically it's like the audio version of Photoshop. They can make you say what you want, what they want, and splice it into whatever. And next thing you know, you're on video saying some shit you never said in your voice. So fuck, that's some crazy shit. All right, so let's look at the comments. Got some more comments coming through. MA, repurpose, and thank you for joining, by the way, MA. Epstein was silenced. I believe that, but how do we know if he was silenced? That again, that reflects to a bigger implication: the fact that people are getting away with this, right? They're getting away with murder. They're getting away with witness tampering and killing of witnesses, whatever. So these are some big things. Is it going to be really investigated? Can we trust the investigators? How do we know they're not in on it? Going back to Occam's razor, how do we know that there isn't like the FBI or some law enforcement that actually has people in it who care about what they do and are actually trying to, stop pedophile rings? And they went and tried, and whoop, Epstein got caught, and now it's like, oh fuck, how do we tie up this loose end? He wasn't supposed to be caught. Everyone was told to stand down, but there's this rookie lieutenant or some FBI guy that wants to, do his, wants to, maybe has a call to duty. It's almost hard to believe that anyone actually does shit because they have pride in what they do and have something that's intrinsically motivating them. I would hope that people in the FBI and law enforcement are like that, but you don't fucking know. You never know anymore about shit. I mean, for all we know, some of these folks got picked on and now it's used as a vector for power for them. The wetiko, for them to take their pain and inflict it upon others instead of making sure that others don't have the pain inflicted upon them that the original person felt. All right, Mike says, there's no doubt about Epstein being silenced. Mike says, have the authorities raided his so-called island yet? Yes, they did. FBI supposedly went again. Are they the good kind, or are they? What are the instructions? Or do they get instructions? Are they real anymore, or are they part of the deep state, or who are these people? They're supposedly real people, like we're real people, but I don't. Do you know? I don't know. I mean, we're in this crazy situation. All right. So Chris says, yes, they went last week. Of course, who knows if they actually looked for anything, let alone if they're actual agents on the TV. Don't even get me started on the pick of the body on the gurney. Yeah. Stranger Things shit. It's not really the boy. It's fake. MA, have you heard about the people planning to rush Area 51? Thoughts? Yes, I've heard about that. That's an interesting phenomenon. There was also a counter meme, not a counter meme, but another sort of meme going around saying to try to instigate general strike. It's like, dang, if we can get like X millions of people to sign on to Area 51 raid, why aren't the working class being like really gung-ho about a call-in sick day? And everyone calls in sick on that day. Can they fire us all? Right? So they can't kill us all at Area 51. Yeah, they can. They'll gun you down. They don't give a fuck. Because the way that they will justify it in their brain, right? Remember, these are humans. These are American citizens that are part of our military. But what will they do? They've taken an oath to defend the nation against all enemies, foreign and what? Domestic. All they got to do to, let's say there's 3 million. That's a lot of fucking people. 3 million people that decide to come. I'm just making it up. I don't remember when. Let me look in here and see if anyone. Yeah, they didn't end up. Okay, yeah, didn't end up doing it after all. Yeah, even if they did, 3 million blasting, they will kill them all, and they will just say, you know what? They were domestic enemies. They will justify it in their mind. Mass slaughter of American citizens. The government, the people in the government will do that because there's a mechanism for them to justify their action through this thing that they can hold sacred. And our society has been conditioned to hold vows like this sacred above other things, like sacred above the life of your brothers and sisters, if that makes sense, because they are no longer your brothers and sisters according to wordplay and according to these sort of systems that we have in place. So They would just drop a bomb on 3 million Americans and say, fuck it. Oh, they became domestic enemies. Even though we fucking pay for Area 51, even though it's our tax dollars, fuck those assholes. It's our fucking country and our tax dollars. This is the whole issue with a lot of libertarians and right-wing folks talking about the small government being appealing compared to big government, right? Because government can be hijacked and can be turned against you. However, the hypocrisy of the conservative or right-wing mind is we need small government when it comes to teachers, when it comes to social workers, when it comes to helping the fellow citizens. But we need a bigger government when it comes to police and when it comes to the military, right? So there's some kind of weird dialectic going on. I've had my very controversial opinion about it, and I still have I've evaluated it constantly and thoroughly, and I still hold the opinion because there's something special about the history of the police and the history of our military. There's something special about that draws conservatives to those forms or those components of the government and not the government as a whole, right? So they wouldn't say, yeah, we should boost, welfare programs for those that are not able to hack it in the current system, or we should reform the system to make it more equitable to all of the citizens. No. But if it meant that we should put more people in the military, if it means more money in the military, then by all means, we have plenty of that. So why, right? There's a big question why. I'll hold my thoughts on that. But yeah, for Area 51, they got a lot of people hyped up about it. But why aren't they hyped up about class dynamics, which are actually affecting their life? I mean, Area 51 could come and go and mean nothing to anyone at this very moment. And it won't change your rent. It won't change your boss. It won't change your children's future. It won't do shit. It's just like a fun little exercise and a bunch of people claiming they would do something in a little fantasy, which is fun, whatever. But come on, let's do some real shit. General strike, yo. I don't even remember what day it was. It's supposed to be in September. But it could happen if we actually, had that kind of appetite for actual change for a better world. Because I'll tell you, there was a time when a generation ago that, you could get a job either at a factory or anywhere else or whatever, out of high school, raise a kid, have a car and a house and a spouse at home, taking care of that shit while you're out there scrounging and earning a decent living enough to where you can put your kids through college or invest in yourself a little bit. And we don't get that anymore. Basically, the writing was on the wall for the previous generation, and they chose to do nothing because they were afflicted with Wetiko, which is cannibalistic virus, which causes people to cannibalize their fellow human for their own benefit, including their children, because the fact that we borrow the earth from our children is lost on so many people. Those people, no doubt, are afflicted with Wetiko virus, the psychospiritual virus described by the Cree Indians, the Algonquins, the Ojibwe Indians, multiple tribes of Native American, I said Indians, but Native American tribes, etc. Okay. Okay, so Mike says, yes, I wish they would just do it. I'm anxious about it. Okay, turned out I read that. Okay, Mike says, it'd be there leading the, I think he said, man, I'd be there leading the front line if I didn't have children to feed. Who knows what will happen if and when they do rush Area 51. MA says something like, I don't know if this is, maybe you can help clarify. Besides Bernie and Warren, who do you like from Dems, and what's your ideal ticket? Oh, so besides Bernie and Warren, who do I like from the Dems? Oh man, nobody. Oh God. I mean, Yang maybe Yang, but UBI is not UBI for those of you that don't know Andrew Yang and what UBI is. UBI is Universal Basic Income, which is basically like a government stipend. I think he was going to give like $1,000 a month to people to sort of offset costs and to maybe offset welfare programs to some degree. There was some talk about this $1,000 supplanting or replacing stuff like Medicare or some other types of governmental programs, but I do see some issues with universal basic income because, I mean, of course, there are a lot of people that bring up the notion of inflation to see that you have the idea that capitalists know that people have a guaranteed $1,000 a month, so they will manipulate their prices and things, sales, etc., whatever, to account for this extra $1,000. Unless there's safeguards against that I don't know. I think this is really a stopgap measure, not even stopgap. I don't think that it'll do much anything. It won't stop the contradictions of capitalism, and it won't stop the current trajectory of the detachment of worker productivity and compensation. So I think that it's a neat idea. Milton Friedman was an advocate of it. If that tells you anything, I mean, he's a Chicago boy. The Chicago School of Economics is a debunked, just sort of it's a shill science is what it is. It's a paid shill economics process. And then, you've got your Austrian school too, which, I mean, to be honest with you, I'm not super deep into the total differences between the Austrian and Chicago School of Economics, but basically, I can understand this notion of individual spending versus government taxation and central control. In those tenets, with those concepts, I agree with Milton Friedman. And that's where UBI becomes a sort of a powerful thing, because people can make choices, individual choices on how they spend that basic income. However, the real fight and the real solution, the real move, the real revolution is to the left of Bernie and Warren, is really to the left of them. It is to create a cultural paradigm where we change the relationship between labor and capital, that we don't treat people as items, as commodities, but instead we treat people like partners, because we can accept money from people all day long and make them business partners with us, but someone could spend 12 years working with you building a business, and there's never a second thought of them by default after spending 12 years with you, that they would be part owner of the thing they helped build after 12 years. You know what I mean? So that paradigm shift is the next real shift. Until then, we're really looking at stopgaps. But yeah, Bernie and Warren are probably my tops. Tulsi, to some degree. Tulsi has some weird stuff here and there. I mean, I was a big fan of Tulsi, but I just feel like there's something kooky going on with Tulsi. I don't really know. I can't put a finger on it, but she has some really weird takes on imperialism and things like that, which I'm very against, the notion that the United States should be able to use the rest of the world in whatever way it sees fit in order to ensure that Americans have a certain living standard in order to win elections or to keep an uprising from happening or whatever. I don't know, whatever they're doing, but that's my take on it. So I've been rambling. All right, so MA, Yang Gang all day. UBI is the future. Yang is amazing candidate, Chris says. Yang, Mike says Yang here. MA, we will have to go to UBI once machines can replace us. See, and that's the thing. UBI is still a stopgap, governmental controlled stopgap, Because if people were guaranteed equity in the enterprises they helped build and democratic control of workplaces, that would mean automation would mean vacations, and you would still get dividend income. You would still have capital gain from the enterprise that was being built. If we have these things in place, it's almost getting to the point where it's dang near too late. But UBI is, if that's the case, UBI is already too late. We need to change labor and capital relations, just like it's tantamount to the change in capital and labor relations that we saw at the abolition of chattel slavery, right? That was a labor and capital relationship. It's a cultural relationship, right? Think about this. Hold on, there's another comment before I go into this thought. MA, people will be replaced in business. Yes, that's why UBI is so important. Yeah, again, I still think it's stopgap. UBI isn't stopgap, it's the solution. It really isn't, because I'll tell you why. Because UBI is taking money from where? From some sort, from taxation, right? And then we're divvying it out amongst the population and simply giving people money from one place to another, right? So it just becomes another what's it called? Dang it, transfer payment, right? And the thing is, at the risk of sounding damn near libertarian, I don't trust the government. Now, if you trust the government, that's super duper. But I mean, right now the government's been hijacked to give them the free reign to conduct a UBI process. I feel like is disastrous. If we were to create a legislative path to encouraging cooperatives instead of corporations. So, God damn, my dogs are crazy. I don't know if you guys can hear my dogs barking in the background. So either the hot revolution comes and this paradigm is proposed, or legislation can be proposed to basically have tax scheduling that favors cooperative enterprises over corporate enterprises, and the high taxation of corporate enterprise, or high taxation on corporate enterprises, could also be used to fund public and social programs, while taxes should be reduced on cooperatives. And in fact, I would say reducing taxation overall. I would even propose that founders of cooperatives be able to have tax-free income from those cooperatives that they create, depending on how much equity is given to their workers. By doing that, by guaranteeing equity over time, where you can vest into this enterprise, and by having democratic control of workplaces. The more employees you have, the more say they should have on even things like compensation. So at this point, what you're doing is you're taking the total that this enterprise, or a business or whatever, right? It doesn't matter if you have 30,000 employees or 30 employees. Now, for small businesses, I mean, we can come up with things that, things would be gradual or progressive depending on how many people you have in the enterprise. So if you have 300, it's far cry different than 30,000, right? So if you do have 30,000, then they should have a very high stake as far as workplace democracy. They should have be able to make, or at least have representatives that make big decisions on behalf, or at least weigh in on behalf of the workers. Now, if there's redistribution at the point of creation, then UBI isn't necessary, because everyone's getting more money because they've created that money and they're getting more of it, right? And also, if you worked somewhere 12 years or X number of years, then you now have shares that you could sell back to the organization for capital infusion. or you can retain those shares and get dividend income just like a shareholder would, as long as you hold those shares. And there's plans. I mean, there's ways that we can reconcile how long the shares can be held, whether you can sell them on the market, etc. But having people have ownership in these enterprises will create a situation where automation could be what's it called? Automation could be welcomed as a way for people to still make money, because the organization's still making money. And how did they buy the technology for automation? From what profit? Who created that profit? The workers. So the workers should be able to benefit from the automation. If we simply put UBI in place, they're not doing that, right? You're just transferring money from one place to another with a government intermediary. If we were to change the paradigm, right? Again, chattel slavery was okay because a cultural paradigm. It was okay to purchase somebody. It's still okay to purchase somebody. We just do it by the hour, or we do it by salary, or we do it by commission. You still can purchase people because their labor cannot be divorced from their physical body. So in reality, you're leasing a person for the period of time that they're conducting their labor. And really, you're paying for their labor that they are producing or giving to exchanging to the organization. But there's no baseline compensation for the opportunity risk that they've taken by staying with your organization as opposed to leaving and going somewhere else, right? So those are some things that, I would have you think about. Now, I would rather Yang win than Trump. So if that's any consolation, MA. So we'll see. Yes, my MA says your solution involves the government too, though. Yes, you're right. But hold on. All solutions will inevitably involve government. So yes, you're right, and I'm glad you brought that up. So one of the things that I get a lot from these libertarian, like Ayn Rand people, those guys, is as I propose that equity should be guaranteed, that we should have this paradigm, they say, well, you go start your own business. I'm like, that's like that. And cooperatives exist right now within the capitalist framework. And my answer to that is, during chattel slavery, there were plantations labored by free people. At the same time, they existed. There weren't as many of them, or maybe there were, I don't know, there's not. Not everybody had slaves too, right? Maybe the highest estimates we're looking at maybe 30%, and those are super high estimates, including people who basically rented slaves. Okay, so the paradigm of chattel slavery wasn't 100% universal, but what stopped it? Was it market forces of people opening plantations with free men that stopped it, or was it government intervention that stopped chattel slavery? Right? Yes, you would need government intervention to create the framework for creating this equity distribution in this way, to cultural shift. Like, we aren't allowed to hire children anymore. That's a cultural shift. It's not that children can't do work. We know that because Nestle will enslave children for our chocolate, and we're totally fine in exporting that child slavery and child labor to the Congo or some shit. And eating candy bars, but we're not okay with it being done in our own soil, right? It's a cultural shift that changed. So we need a cultural shift of capital and labor relations. So you're right, the government would be involved, but only to the extent that they're currently involved in the abolition of chattel slavery. With the abolition of chattel slavery, did that mean the government had to take over your enterprise? No, if you get caught with slaves, you get in trouble, right? So to do the proposal or the culture shift that I propose by treating, and I don't even want to call it, because there's a term for what I say, what I'm proposing. It's called market socialism, and some people even talk about socialist, anarcho-socialism, or social anarchists, or something to that degree. I mean, there's fun. There's some differences between those things, but as I talked about before, terms are often only as good as their uses, right? So there are folks out there using terms like market socialism to describe this guarantee of worker equity and democratic control of workplaces without government central control, right? It's a framework. Just like you're not allowed to enslave people, you're not allowed to use child labor, right? You're not allowed to do certain things without getting in trouble. So what I propose would have the same amount of government involvement as what we currently have, as far as not allowing those types of things to happen. But I mean, you bring up some really good points, and you're right. All solutions will inevitably involve government. And at the end of the day, everything through our history has involved government to some degree, right? Because what is the government? If it's supposed to be us, right? It's supposed to be, in a way, reflective of the society in which we agree to live in. At this point, I think most of us, out of the 5 people, we're up to 5 folks, 5 unique folks. We want to bring more unique folks into this conversation. So please make sure to tell your friends, like, subscribe, all that stuff. But yeah, it's something where you know, we got to think about it as a society and whether or not we still want to keep things going this way. You know, Frederick Douglass is one of my favorite quotes. He says, "Experience demonstrates that there is a slavery of wages that is what is it? Nearly as galling as screw it. I always forget it. Let me find that quote. I've got it here. Experience demonstrates there is a slavery of wages. Forget it. I'll just read it. Experience demonstrates that there may be a slavery of wages, only a little less galling and crushing in its effects than chattel slavery, and that this slavery of wages must go down with the other." This is Frederick Douglass. Spent time as a slave, was an active abolitionist, spent time as a free man, very eloquent, spoke a lot, put his life on the line, laid his body on the gears of the machine for the benefit of his fellow man and woman citizens, brothers and sisters in our nation. And that's what he had to say about that. So he lived the life of a chattel slave, and he is now comparing the wage slave to being similar to that of a chattel slave, right? Only a little less galling and crushing. So we've gone from fully galling and crushing to a little less galling and crushing. And so my suggestion to the rest of us is to switch it up. And here's the other thing that my proposal, a deeper thing that would happen, all this conspiracy shit would be brought down, would be mitigated, right? We would mitigate the problems we're having now. Why? With your nose to the grindstone, can you look up and see what the people above you are doing? When you're down looking at your work, right? You got 2 jobs. You're doing what you can for your family. You're up all day. You're working 18-hour days. You're doing this and that. You don't have weekends. You got your kid obligations. You got this obligation. Do. At the end of the day, how much in government involvement are you doing? How much of being an active citizen are you able to do? Or how able are you to do that? If we were to switch to people as partner principles that I propose, a little alliteration there for you guys. If we were to switch to that, if you worked somewhere, number one, you would have democratic control, or people ahead of you, even before your equity vesting, would have the workers ahead of you would have had democratic control of, to at least to some degree, the wages in which they were paid. So number one, you'd be paid more. Number two, after a period of time, let's say you were working there 10 years or 12 years, you decided, you know what, I want to change up. I want to get politically involved. Well, now you have shares built up that are bringing you dividend income. Maybe you saved up some money from the higher wage that you can now that you got through democratic control of the workplace. So now you have more money saved up. You have dividend income coming, or you could sell your shares back to the organization. And what can you do now? Now you can look up. Now you have time, resources to see what the fuck are these assholes doing. They really are making a fucking child sex ring. They really are dumping chemicals in the fucking sky. They really are doing this shit. Guess what? I have time and resources to fucking stop it. Right? I have time and resources to dedicate to becoming an active citizen. But of course, do you think that the elite people want this? Fuck no. They're just going to beat one dog and make the other dog fight the other dog. Right? Meanwhile, they're going to keep beating the dogs. They got their German Shepherd chilling, right? Their lap dogs like Epstein and all these sycophants. We talked about what sycophant meant in a previous episode. Anyone remember? Sycophant, basically a kiss ass is what a sycophant is. I'll show you guys the definition. I'll read it real quick. But yeah, it's basically someone who's going to rub their nose as far up the bum of someone else who has power in order to glean from that power, right? So here, the definition of sycophant. It's a noun. A person who acts obsequiously towards someone important in order to gain advantage. There's another fucking $5 word, obsequiously. Let's look it up. Obsequiously, right? So it's basically that someone is kissing ass. I think that's the $5 term for kissing someone's ass is obsequiously. But let's take a look at what our dictionary has to say. Well, for some reason, it's not wanting to look up obsequiously for me. But I do appreciate all the comments. What else we got? What other thoughts do you guys have about the world, the things that we're talking about, etc.? And while you're thinking about that, also, I keep thinking about how can we create a sort of a Patreon subscription type service? Like what would be something cool? I think it would be cool to, oh man, I wonder if it's all backwards, I think. Sorry, YouTube people. I guess it's showing everything backwards. Obsequious, right? Obedient or attentive to an excessive or servile degree, right? So someone who is acting like a lapdog to power. That's a sycophant, right? Anyway, so we have the elite and their sycophants who are beating the American public, who are the other two dogs, and instead of fighting the enemy who's beating them, they are biting and fighting each other, and that is the state of our union at the moment. But perhaps there will be a new some unifier. I always keep thinking that there's a unifier, some grand unifier who will take at least 65%, 70% of the people of the nation will resonate with and be willing to see through the bullshit and realize that person can help bring about change. I almost think it's Bernie Sanders, but he even speaks in the words of the paradigms, and it's not his fault because people are trained to understand in those terms. But I think the American people are waking up more and more. Not woke, not that. Just that they know something's weird and they're willing to listen to people who have ideas, even if it's going to make them kick and scream for a little while. And hopefully they find the right people. So one thing I ask when you're arguing with someone who's really like a brick wall, ask them, who would you need to hear what I'm saying from in order to believe it? Right? I always wonder those things. I remember I was arguing with this kid who was trying to tell me that people in early Americas during Manifest Destiny and whatnot, when they came here, right? There were some indentured servants and there were some folks who were employees of somebody, but a lot of they were saying that in fact a great majority of people who came here to settle for the Western expansion didn't simply buy their ticket and come to America or stow away and come to America, that they all had bosses. And then when they landed, they went and worked in a factory or something instead of expanding westward, settling on a chunk of land and subsisting off that land. And I was just like, well, what do you mean? I mean, all of the people, you think they all had bosses and listened to their boss? You don't think they just went out and claimed some Indian land and had their rifle and protected, their little house on the prairie, against the indigenous folks that were trying to protect themselves? And they were convinced that all of the people that came here, they all worked for someone, and that never happened. That there was no settling of the land. That nobody was self-sufficient at any time in the United States. That there was always a boss. That there was never a settler who lived out there on the land with other settlers that were also living off the land, or even in small communities where basically they lived in a communal form. You might have your blacksmith and your leathersmith and this and that, but everyone was working together against the elements to try to make shit work, right? Now, some of them failed, some of them didn't, whatever. I mean, it's a bunch of Europeans coming to a land they shouldn't have even been in. So if they died, then whatever, that's going to happen. You can't necessarily fault the structures by which they attempted to make things work, because in a way they were modeling how to survive to some degree, off of the indigenous people, right, who'd been there for millennia prior, right? All right, let's see what's going on in the chat stream. Chemtrails. Mike says, if you pay attention to the chemtrails, you'll see spread out and connect together to form clouds. I've sat there for hours and watched, counted 20-something chemtrails in the sky at once. Crazy. Bingo. Clouds are very low now. Everything has changed. Well, okay. So this is a good point. Now, I know that the weather can, that clouds can be seeded, that weather can be manipulated, that in fact the U.S. government has conducted experiments on the American people, right, unbeknownst to them, with different types of chemical agents, with different even ticks, supposedly. There is a theory out there right now, it may be more than a theory, that the U.S. government, in fact, helped to propagate the spread of Lyme disease as part of a biological warfare campaign that ended up sort of getting out of hand and spreading around the nation. So or like you hear about the Tuskegee Airmen, or you hear about there's all sorts of different reasons why you shouldn't trust the government and people that are in the elite realms. However, the thing that is always, just like the Epstein scandal, and Chris, I think, mentioned it, about the fact that, they bust the low level people. So, this is a reality, that it really exists, right? That they're busting these pedophile rings, etc. And it becomes a conspiracy theory because you never see them getting busted, the elite getting busted for the same thing, yet they're implicated in those things, right? So there's always, in these conspiracies or whatever they're trying to create, there's always the shit mixed with the real, right? The fake shit mixed in with the reality. Like, so for instance, chemtrails, chemical trails being released by aircraft into the air. Some of those, I'm not saying they don't 100% exist, but a lot of what you're seeing are contrails. Now, chemtrail people that have looked up chemtrails have seen rebuttals against contrails. However, right, that is a natural phenomenon of the combustion of hydrocarbons in our atmosphere, right? What are hydrocarbons? Hydrocarbons are the thing that make up your jet fuel, right? Jet fuel is a distillate of oil, petroleum distillate. So when you get oil, it's in a raw, crude form, right? In order to actually use it, you have to distill it. And you see, if you've ever passed by a refinery, there's all these tubes and all of these big vat looking things, and most of the time there's a big flame that's burning off, and what they're doing is burning off propane or other natural gases. And I don't know why they have to burn it off instead of keep it, but supposedly maybe it's just actually more efficient as far as capitalism goes for them to just burn it off into the air rather than go through the trouble of bottling it and retaining under pressure this propane and other natural gas that is a distillate from the fractional process. It's a fraction from the distilling process of the crude oil, right? So these are hydrogen and carbon molecules in various configurations, right? So you have oil or grease, then oil, and then you have like diesel fuel, and then gasoline, or actually jet fuel, then kerosene, and then gasoline. And I don't know if that's exactly the fractional distillate breakdown. You can look it up yourself if you want. Oil and gas, petroleum distillation process. And you start getting, you even get paraffins, and you start getting different types of hydrocarbon makeup from this crude oil, right? This raw product from the ground. So when you break down hydrogen and these hydrogen and carbon molecules with oxygen, right? When they break the bounds in order to create energy, which a jet engine is doing, right? The hydrogen and carbon are now broken away from each other. They are combining with oxygen, right? And to some degree nitrogen, which is all over. That's where you get oxides of nitrogen, right? And when a hydrogen combines with oxygen, what is that? Ever heard of H2O, right? So a natural byproduct of the combustion, and you learn this in automotive technology as well, because you're also combusting the hydrocarbon, right, is the production of water. Now, I live in Florida. A lot of people who are watching right now live in Florida, so they may not be familiar with driving in the wintertime or driving their car at a point where the dew point is low enough to where the water from the exhaust pipe becomes condenses and becomes basically what looks like steam, right? Becomes a condensate in the air. Now, would you accuse your neighbors of driving as they drive down the road in the wintertime and they're billowing big plumes of steam from their car? Would you accuse them of emitting a chemtrail? Probably not, right? But in the very high atmosphere, if you're producing water, guess what clouds are made of? If you're producing water in the high atmosphere and it's very hot during the combustion process, and then as it cools, it condenses, and guess what? There's dust and dirt in the atmosphere, right? It seeds and condenses in the air, right? So we have a few different situations going on here. We have the actual chemtrails that are being dumped around, but we also, in the midst of that, have actual contrails, which are a byproduct of the combustion process of hydrocarbons in oxygen, right? So we, we can't look at all of the things that we see. For instance, there's when Mike is describing when Mike is describing all of these trails going back and forth all over the place. Well, one of the things to note is your proximity to an airport and proximity to a base, proximity to traffic, the traffic lanes, because the FAA has created lanes for traffic in the air, right? You have to look at all of those things and in order to really understand what's happening. So you'll see contrails going any which way, and some of them will stay there for a very long time, depending on the general humidity, depending on the temperature, depending on the atmosphere of the air, or excuse me, the elevation of the aircraft. So there are a lot of different fundamentals involved. Also, you have to think about the people that are applying this chemical. Think about this. If you really wanted to apply a chemical to a population, would you dump it 35,000 feet in the air? And where would it go? That trail is sitting there in the air for a very long time, right? So where is it going to land? So if you're really trying to target somebody, this is a very ineffective way to do that. And in fact, if you could see this trail of chemicals from so many thousands of feet away, then this is an immense volume of chemical, right? So who could willy-nilly just dump out immense volumes of chemicals daily, right? All through all these airplanes, right? That would also all have to be complicit in the delivery of this chemical or multiple chemicals. So I'm not saying that weather manipulation via aircraft doesn't exist. I'm not saying that it's not possible that shit's being dumped on the population. However, we also have to consider, just like I was challenging the flat earthers, if you don't do at least the math that the people in Syene and Alexandria were doing to calculate the circumference, right? Flat stuff. Well, I guess you could still have the circumference of the globe, right? And the actual what's it called? The notion that it is actually a spherical object that we're hurtling through the universe on, back with no technology. We should be looking at the same level of rigor to find out, what's really happening. So I would challenge chemtrail folks to at least put that much effort into it. Now, like I said, the most sinister aspect of manipulation is to hide it within reality, right? In plain sight, amongst the contrails, right? And that's where we end up as people wondering what the hell is really going on. So, okay, so let's see what Mike says. Pay attention, cloud trails, count 20. Okay, Chris says, bingo, clouds are very low now. Everything has changed. Mike says, I took a picture of an X-shaped chemtrail cloud about a month ago when I was driving. I was like, why is no one talking about this? I've never seen shit like that 20 years ago. Chris, I believe the X is a mark they leave as a sign to show their spot, as in X marks the spot. Makes sense that X marks the spot, but what are they doing in that spot? That's the mystery. So Chris says exactly. So Chris says, James, the planes that are doing these trails are not your everyday commercial jets. They are making clouds and flying extremely high. Most are going straight up in the air at very high altitudes. Yeah, so some of these, but here's the thing. There are also a lot of contrails that exist in the air, and it's, how are we differentiating all of those? Now, if there are these weird airplanes that are doing what you're saying, sure, I'm not gonna say they could be their best strategy is to do it in plain sight and blame it on something else. But we also can't negate the something else as existing and say that all of them are that. So we got to be careful about that. But yeah, to your point, if they're doing this, they got these crazy airplanes doing it. We should wonder why and who's doing it, because it affects us all, right? Is there any kind of national security excuse that allows the government to take liberties with its own people? You tell me. I mean, that's what this show's about, is for us to hash this out. If the answer is no, and they're doing it anyway, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to run for office? Are you going to go on a clandestine mission to stop chemtrails? That's the big question, I think, facing the American people, is we're going to continue with our nose to the grindstone, harder and harder and more until people are more and more desperate. Now, we could either wait until we are back in the olden days where people are dying at the cannery and shit, or we have suicide nets at Convergys and call centers around our country like they do in China, or we can start thinking about things now. And it's not just because of labor relations, it's because of our nation and the crazy planes that Chris is talking about, right? All right, Chris, I do agree with the contrails, but when they are spraying in length these trails and specifically trying to block the sun, as we know they're wanting to do, as seeding clouds for rain. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of manipulation going on. Definitely a lot of people with power to do this kind of manipulation that we don't trust. So, I mean, you're right about there. You're definitely right about that. And there have been public plans about blocking out some of the sun in order to mitigate global warming. At the end of the day, the real threat to our existence on this earth, right? Not only humans, I mean, yeah, everybody, everything, every living thing on this planet is being impacted by a single species on this planet. And part of the problem is that this species has been infected by the psychospiritual virus of Wetiko, and the mechanism for this infection is capitalism, colonialism, and capitalism. Colonialism was the vector for dominance and supremacy by a certain group of people. Capitalism was the machine dropped off and installed that pillages and exploits the those nations and those places throughout our world, and including our own, right? And exploits each other, exploits everything. Everything is up for grabs. And there's a specific flavor of capitalism called neoliberalism. And if you're not familiar with the word neoliberal, it's it describes the paradigm that we are living in now. So we'll look at the actual definition per the dictionary. And then, I was talking about trying to get folks to subscribe to the Patreon and seeing if we can come up with ways to, things that people might want to do, or might want. Wait a minute. That they might want to subscribe for. And one of them that I was thinking about is doing a weekly freestyle. I don't know if people are interested in something like that, but I was thinking, if you guys, it looks like we still got a couple folks on, how many people we got? Nobody on Facebook. Look at that. I got the most followers on Facebook, but the least viewership. YouTube's where it's at. And it's really our super fans here that are spreading the word and getting people to watch. That's really making the big difference. But if you guys want, I was going to give a little hint of what you may or may not be able to expect, because it depends. You never know when you're coming off the top what's going to drop. But come up with a topic that's not a topic that we talked about, and not a top. Well, it could be a topic we talked about, but not in the title. So while I try to queue up this neoliberal thing, because I had a problem, sorry people, I had a problem with my technology here. I've got a program I'm using to handle this sort of split screen that I'm doing and changing from different things. And it's a free program that I'm pretty sure is like a virus or something. It's probably data logging my computer and shit and whatever, because it's free and whatever. But it makes this show possible. I had to reboot it. Here we go. Neoliberal. Number one, relating to or denoting a modified liberalism tending to favor free market capitalism. Right. So liberal or liberalism has been a hijacked term. Again, terms are only as good as their usage. Right. So it's been used in an incorrect way to describe basically your hippies or whoever, like these social justice warriors. But liberalism is in opposition to stuff like feudalism or authoritarianism, where you have a very tight control from authority on how things work. So liberalism, the way that it is traditionally used, was how you would describe something like capitalism. It would be a liberation of the market, and therefore a liberal market, as opposed to an authoritarian market. But neoliberal has come to describe a form of capitalism in which anything is open to free market interpretation, right? So what's the solution for poverty in a free market world? Well, there is no solution for poverty. That's why people were dying in the olden days at the canneries and the meatpacking plants and in the mines. There is no solution. The solution is put you to work until you die, because that's cheaper than buying you outright and keeping you alive. That is true neoliberalism. Now, why is this a term now, neoliberal, even though it happened? We saw what happened many, many years ago. Because after the Depression, we saw the creation of welfare capitalism with FDR, right? We saw major social programs, Keynesian economic theory in play, major transfer payments, Social Security, these kinds of things, big public works projects. We're going to spend our way out of the Depression, right? And so a lot of labor rights, a lot of different things. I mean, and this is mainly in the context of white people, because non-whites were basically left out of this whole shit for a large part. But this is a change from neoliberalism. Really, you could look at the father and mother of neoliberalism a lot of times are Reagan and Thatcher. They sometimes refer to it as Reaganism or Thatcherism, in which you would destroy the welfare state of that's created by the government to make up for the psychopathic tendencies of outright capitalism. In the neoliberal paradigm, again, everything is up for free market. So the roads that you're driving on, instead of being open to everybody, would be toll roads. The everything that you do would be subject to a market, and you would have to just deal with that. So, in some cases that might be a good thing, but in other cases, like we're seeing now in the American healthcare system, the market doesn't have a real solution to health costs, because how much is your life worth? How much is the life of your kids? How much are you willing to pay to keep them alive? Hey, they know that. Capitalist pay and capitalist price. This is the flip side. I just realized this. Capitalist price is inversely proportionate to desperation. Or actually, no, capitalist price is proportionate, not inversely proportionate. It is proportionate. Capitalist pay is inversely proportionate. So, and we're talking about general machinations of capital or movements of capital, not the benevolent business owner who pays their employees really well, and all of these things. I'm talking about like the things that cause Foxconn to have suicide nets, right? The unimpeded pursuit of profit is what I'm talking about, right? Um, the pay is inversely proportionate to desperation. The more desperate, the lower the pay. Price is directly proportionate to desperation. The more desperate, the higher the price. Oh, you want to save your mother? Well, that medicine costs 20 grand. You want to save your father? Do you love him? How much? Well, that's going to cost you 80 grand. Oh, you want to stay alive? How bad? Your stay in the hospital will be 150,000, right? How bad do you want your life? See, these are things that the free market has no real solution for, right? And so it's a fallacy to try to apply the free market to every single thing. However, there will always be a market, so you can't have government central control over everything, because there will always be a black market that will pop up, right? So we can't forget about that. All right, so we don't even have no comments on the Facebook. We had some people join in, but we had a lot of comments on the YouTube stream. I didn't see any topics, so I guess we're not dropping any verses tonight. But if you do have some topics that you want to talk about into the future, please let me know. It could be anything. The more controversial, the really, this is supposed to be a forum for discussing controversial topics and being able to reconcile. You might not agree with everything I say. I might not agree with everything you say, but it's a place for us to sort of hash these things out honestly and critically. So I want to make sure that everyone knows that they are very appreciated as far as your comments, and just for you who you are. Know that your worth is not determined by your wealth, that you, as a human being, simply for being yourself, right? This sounds like some self-help shit, but it's the truth. You see a major suicide epidemic happening right now. And part of that is, I truly believe, in large part due to the capitalist framework and capitalist reality that we're living in. There's an alienation that is created when you see your brother or sister as competition for a finite resource. We together as a species are having to deal with a finite resource, but we should not look at our individuals within in society as those people who are in a way the enemy that we're fighting. Granted, competition's great. Not everyone gets to have the great job, because some people are better suited to it. But at the same time, the focus should be on the mass that is created by the systems within our structure. The fact that the capitalist paradigm needs a major pool of cheap labor in order to maintain profitability, and that fewer and fewer higher paying jobs exist because fewer and fewer people are capable of doing some of these jobs. The line that we've been fed that makes the beaten dog bite their fellow dog is that my compensation reflects my worth, which it doesn't necessarily. It reflects a lot of things. Could reflect privilege, could reflect your intelligence, could reflect your drive, could reflect connections, could reflect a lot of things. But as a nation and as citizens who care about our nation and our fellow citizen, we have to look at the bigger picture, because when the bottom is pulled very low, all subsequent jobs get pulled down with it, right? So it's like what happened. I mean, this is going to be hyperbolic and in a very, here's another word for you guys if you guys aren't familiar with the word hyperbolic. This is something that's going to sound like I'm exaggerating, like what is hyperbolic? Or it's related to hyperbole. Let me just look up hyperbole. So some of you guys might know already what hyperbole is. Let me see here. So hyperbole is like basically an exaggeration. So if you say something is hyperbolic, it's like you're exaggerating the point. So I'm not being hyperbolic when I'm discussing the terms. I'm not purposely being hyperbolic about the terms and conditions that I'm explaining. These are things where I feel like we need more canaries in that coal mine to show us that the carbon monoxide is there. So hyperbolic, exaggerated statements or claims not meant to be taken literally, right? So that's what hyperbole is, and I'm not speaking in hyperbole in most cases when I'm talking, unless I tell you that. All right, so let's see what else we got on the chat. So Chris says, let's talk some about one of my favorite books, The Creature of Jekyll Island. Oh, yes, and how the feds were created. So perhaps for, yeah, I need to actually, I've never actually read that book. I've heard a lot about it, and I've seen a basically a documentary that talks about the book, but I never actually read the book, but it talks about all of the things that occurred in this this meeting on Jekyll Island, which basically was all of the magnates, all of the elite, basically the most wealthy people in the United States. And so maybe how about this for Wednesday's podcast? We're going to dig into the Federal Reserve. We're going to dig into what it is that that the Fed is and how it came about, because it becomes, if you start digging and looking, it's another sinister plot, and it's another thing that takes us to a point where, you know, we start questioning, is this how it's supposed to be? And if it's not how it's supposed to be, then what the fuck are we doing about it? Right? So, you know, supposedly JFK got shot because he had an executive order to audit the Fed or to disband the Fed. And so, you know, this is this is something that could be dangerous if you were to say, yeah, I want to audit the Fed, or I'm going to audit the Fed, or, you know what, we're going to disband the Fed altogether. You know, that would be a very dangerous thing to do, because try this mental exercise out. For those of you that feel like the elite don't have the crazy power that we think they do, try this mental exercise. Answer in the comments if you want to play along. How much do you think it literally, not just making it up, but like literally for real life and real actual life, how much do you think it would cost to hire either a group of or a single assassin to either threaten or actually kill somebody? How much would it cost? Now, these are top rank, like top of the line, you know. These are boutique assassins. So these are such good assassins that if they got caught, they will bite a cyanide pill and kill themselves rather than reveal you. How much in dollars would that cost to have someone hired out to do that? So think about it and throw a number into the chat stream if you want to play along. If you don't want to put a number, I don't know the number. I mean, fuck, I never actually tried to hire an assassin. I'm just saying, if you had to guess, what would it be? There's no such thing as a wrong answer. I mean, it might be wrong in objective reality, but it might not. Let me see. Chris says, so while we're thinking about this, another topic I think would be good would also touch on the police state of the United States. Ooh, okay. Yes. I read in the Pale Horse book about how the U.S. is essentially used as a world police for the UN. Yeah, I mean, it's probably not even the UN. I doubt it's even the UN. It's Council of Foreign Relations. It's the secret societies that are in cahoots with each other. It's the vectors of power that have ancient lineage in the quote unquote Western world. And yes, General Smedley Butler came out and revealed behind the curtain that the U.S. military is a racket for capital. Corporate, they are corporate foot soldiers. So it's not. I don't know that it's really for the UN. Maybe it is. I just see the UN as a front. I think the UN is what they put up to make us think that there's a bunch of people trying to do shit. But, and you know, you got Alex Jones and these guys talking about how the UN is a globalist plot and this and that. I think the UN is just a show, is like a show float. There's people like, I care about the world. We should end hunger. We should do these things. And not to say that they aren't going to do some of those things, but it's like Miss America going, gathering money for a cause and then showing up to deliver that money. It's like, I think it's a front to the actual power players. And that's one of the more sinister aspects of what it is. Now, if someone has some different ideas, then please dump them in the comments. Okay, so I haven't seen any numbers yet. It's all right if you don't want to commit to a number. Let's pretend. What if it's $1 million? It costs $1 million to have this crack assassin that's like top of the line, like whatever movie you want to refer to, they are above that level in real life as far as assassins go. And I'll say $1 million to do this job, which if you have a different opinion, if you think it's more than $1 million, $3 million, $5 million, $20 million, whatever $1 million, $1 billion. It's going to be less than $1 billion. There's a lot of desperate fuckers out there. They will do it for less than $1 billion. So let's just say $1 million. How many people? Okay, so Mike would say in the millions. So let's say 5 million. It's $5 million to hire a crack assassin to threaten a judge, threaten legislator, threaten a president, threaten whoever the fuck needs to be threatened. Let's say it's $5 million. $5 million to do the job. So Chris agrees $5 million would do the job. Okay, in your city, how many people do you think could afford to hire that assassin? Think about that. There's probably a few in your city. How about your state? How many in your state could hire that assassin, or multiple groups of assassins at $5 million a pop? Now look at the entire nation. How many people in the entire nation could hire the crack assassin for $5 million? Now take it out globally. How many people could possibly hire crack teams of assassins for $5 million a pop? And how many could they hire? Right? So now, does the conspiracy idea seem so far-fetched? There is a reality out there that disparity of resource creates a paradigm by which there are people who control vectors of society and power to an extent that is outside the realm of legislation, outside the realm of the American people, outside the realms of democracy and republic. And this is a reality we must face. Now, of course, if it's happening or not happening, in a way, we're not going to know. We will be entering a period of time in which ignorant rebellion will be better than ignorant subservience, if that makes sense, right? Would you rather be ignorant and working for what you thought was right, or would you rather be ignorant and allowing wrong to happen regardless? And it's not a call to action to do violent shit. There are non-violent things you can do. There's sabotage, which is also illegal, but it's non-violent. There, you can hack into shit. That's illegal, but it's non-violent. Or you can just fucking be violent. There's plenty of ways to be violent and probably not even get caught. If you watch enough of these forensics files and shit like that, sure, they got some tricks up their sleeves. But whatever you do, if you go to plan one of these crazy, not crazy, maybe patriotic actions, depending. I mean, I don't know. Don't do it, because I'm not telling you. Don't let it come back to me. Not yet. But if you do, make sure that you plan as much of it as you can and rehearse in your mind or in secret, right? So that when you go full tilt boogie, right? It's another term I learned from forensic files. When someone commits this heinous act, they, as much as they plan, as much as they want to do something, they get, they go crazy in their mind. Not crazy. They're like full of adrenaline. They don't know what, they start making mistakes and whatever. Your mind goes full tilt boogie is what they say, right? So you just remember, be prepared for full tilt boogie, because when whatever you do gets done, your brain's going to go full tilt boogie. You got to be prepared for that. Okay. So Chris says, but I believe someone would pay $50K for a low level type guy to do it. How many people can afford 50K out there? How many? Like hundreds, thousands in your city? In your city. You know what I mean? Mike says, depending on the importance of the person being assassinated, the more important, the more money. Amen. Amen. So do you think there are people that have enough money and enough on the line that they could hire somebody and they could do some shit to a high level person and actually manipulate the system they're in? Questions, right? I mean, it sounds sort of crazy, but is it really? I don't know if it really is. Mike says, I'm sure our own government has assassins. Well, yeah, CIA, FBI, assassins all over the place. Freaking police, people end up dying all over the place. There's probably police that end up killing Epstein, if he's even fucking dead. I don't even know. Whatever, right? Mike says the Clintons, they are probably just one of many within the, especially within the DC elite. Local politics, probably not as crazy. Maybe New York, Chicago, maybe. In some of these places, maybe. Sure, I would. Maybe even worse in local politics. I don't freaking know. But yeah, who knows? And I don't doubt that the Clintons did do some things like that. But I don't have any real proof of it and whatever. So someone else, even if you did, even if you had the proof, right? What's the truth in a world of lie? But insanity, really, at the end of the day, right? All right. So Chris says, there are dudes in the hoods right here in Jax that are assassins, quote unquote. We just call them goons, though. LOL. That's true. Some of these guys are hired to kill other people. Sometimes some of these guys kill just because they're killing somebody, right? Mike says, I think the Clintons probably are the ones who knocked off Epstein. Man, I wouldn't doubt it either. But then again, Trump is implicated in the Epstein thing, so it might not even be Trump, but someone in that echelon, or it could be that they all had a secret meeting, a la George Carlin, that says, he said there's a big, I think, what did he say? It's a big club and you ain't in it, right? Fucking Trump in the club, Clinton in the club, they up in the club, bottle full of bub. You see what I'm saying? And you ain't in it. And this is something that you don't get to be privy to. And this is a game within the elites. So if Epstein is really dead and he got knocked off by the Clintons, the Trumps, the UK prince, who fucking knows? Kevin Spacey, for all I fucking know. sent an assassin to kill his ass, right? It doesn't matter. It just is further proof that we are the fucking board that they play on, and they don't give a fuck about nothing, right? And so it just makes me wonder, when are Americans going to do what Americans supposedly do? They don't. We ain't doing it. And there's so many people being hijacked, right? The people that you would expect to do something right about it are being hijacked by feelings, the same way that poor Southern whites were hijacked by feelings of the free black man talking to their white women, or that the Northerners were going to come and, rape and pillage their village or some shit, right? Even though, hey, you guess what? Don't leave the Union and no one's going to do shit. But you decide you want to leave the Union, and now you're basically declaring that this section of the United States is now a different country, right? So I'm pretty sure if, let's say, Texas decided that they were just not in the Union, there might be some pushback from the rest of the United States to say, yeah, well, you can't just take a chunk of the nation and declare your own nation out of it. Or if, California decided to create their own nation out of California and secede away, that would be a breakup of the Union. Unless, I don't know, maybe we don't necessarily have a Lincoln out there who really gives a shit about maintaining a union. I don't think anyway, so maybe they wouldn't do anything about it. I don't fucking know. I don't know. All right, so let's see what else we got. Mike says, right, goons in Jacks. Yeah, they're out there. There was just a killing the other day. There's probably someone dying damn near every day in Jacks. I don't know what the hell is going on. That's something I'm very curious about, as far as what's happening in the local community and what we can do to make it better. Again, it goes back to the systems of oppression in the past and in the present, and the system of exploitation via capitalism is another major force. I can guarantee it. Guarantee it. And then remember, when I talk shit on capitalism, I'm not talking about the market. I'm not talking about the government should be in control of the market. No, I'm talking about capital and wage labor relations, the fact that we still have this wage system in place. Chris says, I think that is what they want us to believe. It seems so simplistic. Could be that family from England, the ones in that big castle, right? Mike says, true. Mike, the thing is, we will never know. Right, we won't know. And as long as our noses are to the grindstone, we're not going to really be able to find out for sure. And that is one of the biggest shames that we have. Again, that's why I propose these changes. It's not just because I think workers should get a bunch of money and that there shouldn't be rich people. I'm not saying that. You could still get rich under this proposal that, or the system that I'm proposing that we switch to, but it would allow more freedom and equitable distribution of the wealth being created by the laborers. Because if the laborers aren't creating that wealth, then I would say, hey, capitalist, do it all by yourself. See how much money you can make all just by yourself with no help from someone else. All I'm saying is the help should be a partner, not just, a commodity. All right. So amazing show tonight. Come up with a topic for next week, we're going to be talking about the creature from Jekyll Island, but come up with some topics for upcoming shows. If you got people that like to argue about shit, or you get in an argument with someone and you're like, how do I reconcile this? Or what do you think about this? Something more controversial, the better. Like I was saying, bring it on the show and help me think about things that people would pay $5 a month to do, to be part of. Either I was thinking about creating a book, sort of like a book club, if you want to start tackling stuff like Creature from Jekyll Island. Maybe I could read chapter by chapter. We could go through it and talk about it and that could be a Patreon thing. Or like I said, bust a freestyle based on the topics that are given by the Patreons, and we could do something like that. I don't know if it would be worth it or not, but you know, I've been known to bust a verse or two and get some producers to hand me their cards and whatnot. But help me think of some things, because we definitely need to boost viewership. We want to create a fellowship for our citizens, other brothers and sisters in this nation and across the world, to really reflect on what the fuck is going on in our world around us. Amazon is burning. We're polluting our water. We're dumping shit into the air, and people don't give a fuck. And what kind of world are we? I mean, maybe we are okay living in a cesspool of shit, but is that what we want to leave for our children? I don't even have children. And I'm wondering, what kind of world are we leaving for our children? For those of you that have children, you should really be thinking about this, because if you're a millennial or younger, or even Gen Xer, you should realize that the generation before you had the things much better as far as labor relations go, and their pay versus the production that they created, if that makes sense. Okay, so you can look at the graphs that show production and pay. Like, the more money that the company made, the more money the employees made, and that kept going all the way until the late 70s. Once the late 70s hit, you start seeing wages stay the same. I was just talking to a guy that works, does remodeling stuff, and he was talking about the construction industry, and he was telling me how some of these construction guys, they're getting paid the same money that they were getting paid in the 90s, right? So we're talking, what, how many decades later, right? At least 2 decades later, getting same pay. Meanwhile, rent's going up. Meanwhile, food's going up. Meanwhile, all these things going up. Yeah, we get technology as a trade-off. Maybe the baby boomers didn't get flat screen TVs and cell phones, but hey, technology moves along. So should the paradigm by which we interact with each other. That should move along as well, in my opinion. But I want to thank everyone for joining tonight. I'm going to close out with the Sep Rock beat, and you know what to do. Like, subscribe, share, get your friends involved. Let's start talking. And if you want to be on the show, let me know. You could come to the Duval Studios here in the swamps of Duval, in the Shop Studios, and see the music of the movie magic that's happening. Or you could Skype in. There's some other vectors as well. So if you want to be actually on the show and talk, we can do that too. So don't hesitate to get in touch, or Skype. The Skype is in the description. So please use it if you want. But until next time, Wednesday, 9 o'clock is the next show. And we're going to talk about the Fed and how we're all getting screwed in the end. So until then, deuces.
I look. I look.
This is pure snow! It's everywhere! Have you any idea what the street value of this mountain is? Charles, wait a minute, hold it!